Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Press, and I'm the founder of Archers Raiders, a fan group designed to unite politically progressive fans, students, and alumni of the Morehouse Maroon Tigers and Colgate Raiders. This is the seventh installment of our interview and profile series called The Remarkable Student Athletes of Morehouse and Colgate. My guest today is Mason Pahule, a sophomore at Colgate University. Mason is a midfielder for the Colgate Raiders men's soccer team. He's been a key contributor and consistent starter on the team during both of his seasons at Colgate. Mason, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me this evening.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so I'd like to start by asking you about your journey to Colgate and your career so far. So when you were playing for the Sacramento Republic, what was the recruitment process like for you, and which schools were you initially considering?
The recruitment process I think was kind of interesting. Being at Sacramento Republic, there was a lot of coaches that had a lot of connections from wherever it was in the country. But I think that the recruitment process was made easier by having these coaches. Initially, I was looking, or kind of up until I committed, I was mainly looking at West Coast schools. I was kind of convinced I was going to stay on the West Coast. I was looking at UCLA, Stanford for a little bit, Oregon State, Portland, but yeah, I just ended up at Colgate.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's definitely something that stood out to me. You being on the West Coast, anytime you see that's a very big, I'd imagine a pretty big adjustment to make going from the West Coast, from a city, as you said before, a pretty big city like Sacramento to a smaller town like Hamilton. So at what point in your youth career when you were at Sacramento Republic did Colgate specifically express interest in you?
Yeah, so I took a gap year during or after my senior year of high school. Up until then, it was pretty much, like I said, the West Coast schools. But I reached out to Colgate somewhere in the time during my gap year, and things kind of picked up pretty quickly. Talking to the assistant coach, and then I was still playing with the Republic team during that gap year, so I was able to meet the assistant coach at the time, and it was kind of in between. It was probably the fall of my gap year that kind of things started to pick up between me and the Colgate coaches.
Gotcha. Okay. And so what ultimately sold you on Colgate, right? Because like you said, most of the schools you were looking at on the West Coast, definitely um, schools that you would have been probably more familiar with. What uh,
Yeah,
what made you specifically go with Colgate?
yeah, I get that question a lot. But I think um, definitely from the soccer aspect of things, them having that three-peat from 2016 to 2018 of the Patriot League definitely brought interest to me personally, because I mean I've liked winning all my life, so that was very appealing to me from the soccer aspect. And I think the West Coast, I think as I kind of went through high school, it was kind of I kind of decided that that was kind of maybe little too familiar, and I kind of wanted to jump outside my comfort zone in many ways. And so I moved across the country. So um, I definitely there's also an aspect of I kind of liked colder weather. Didn't necessarily know about the freezing temperatures, but I think I liked Sacramento cold. But no, I'm definitely happy with how I ended here, and yeah,
Yeah, well, definitely. Given the success you've had so far at Colgate, I'd say, not only are you happy, but the Colgate fans and the Colgate community is very, very happy to have you as well.
yeah.
I know I am. So I think you made the right decision. Um, so had you had a chance to actually like visit the campus before you made your decision, or or is this a sort of a commitment like sight unseen?
It's definitely sight unseen. I think there's a picture of me signing my letter of intent on like my plane ride to come visit. So definitely just kind of went all in for it. But I've obviously seen I had saw pictures online, kind of talked to people from the Max Edelstein being from San Francisco. We kind of had that connection, so I was able to reach out to someone that was kind of I could kind of relate to. Also, the assistant coaches at the time, and Ricky still being here, we're both from the West Coast, so that was kind of another connection that kind of made it easier to kind of commit. But yeah, it was definitely some. I didn't see the place before I committed, so it was definitely fingers crossed and hoped I like it. So
All right. Well, the ends justify the means, so it's all
exactly,
good. And I think that's no, but I think that's definitely an admirable trait to want to, get outside your comfort zone, experience something different. I think it's definitely really important for young people to do that. I know it helped me being from uh, the DMV, specifically like Prince George's County, Maryland, going south to Atlanta, um, being able to get those different experiences being on my own definitely helped me grow as a person.
yeah,
And so I'd imagine that's been helpful for you as well.
yeah, definitely.
All right. So moving on here. So your coach, Eric Ronning, is perhaps the most accomplished men's soccer coach in Colgate history. What's it like playing for him?
Yeah, he's definitely kind of one of those motivator people. He kind of just talks to you and like you can kind of keep listening and just kind of be more encapsulated by what he's saying. And from a soccer perspective or an athletic perspective, he's kind of one of those coaches where you want to play for him. He's very passionate about what he's talking about and what he's doing. Um, he's always at we train at 6:45 a.m. twice a week, um, during the spring at least right now. So, but he's always the first one out there. He's got his coffee. He's always wide awake. He's caring about his players. He wants to the best for the program. He wants the best for his players and for the team. So he's definitely someone that it's easy to look up to him, and you as a player want to play for him.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's your teammates I think stressed something similar when I spoke to them when I talked to Bobby and Max specifically. They talked about his ability to motivate you all, so the connections he builds with the players, and sort of the desire, the heart and desire that kind of he instills in you all. So yeah, those are all great traits, and sounds like a phenomenal coach to play for.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so as you reflect on your 2 seasons at Colgate so far, what would you say has been your most memorable experience?
Um, I think that the 0-18 season is kind of memorable for me, in the sense that I have never been a part of something like that. And it's not memorable in the sense that I fondly remember that season, but rather kind of something to look back on and kind of know that I'd never want to be there again. And I know the rest of the guys can say the same thing. But for a high point, I think it was definitely either the Providence game or the Cornell game. The Providence game that we won 3-2 at the beginning, the first game of the season was the first game I think that was played across the country. So there's definitely a lot of people watching that, and just to be able to come out of that, especially after the season we had, I think that was a big turning point in how kind of the rest of the season went for us. And then the Cornell game was fun because it was a top 16 team and it was at home. It was during the sunset. So everything kind of seemed like it was aligning for that win. So, and I don't think we had beat Cornell. I might be wrong on this, but in maybe over a decade. So that was kind of fun to be a part of a team that did that, especially with the success that past Colgate teams had.
Yeah, definitely a historic performance and a historic victory. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that the 0-18 season was memorable because I think like it's impossible almost to separate the I guess the high of the Providence victory from sort of the feeling of disappointment from that season, right? A part of the reason that I think
Mm-hmm.
that is such a that there's such a positive connotation with that victory. Obviously, in isolation, it's certainly a phenomenal performance, beating a top 25 ranked team in their on their field in their stadium. But it gains even more value when you look back on kind of what you guys overcame and what you came from the
Yeah,
previous season. So yeah, I think
yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Um, all right, so let's see here. I think we're going to shift gears now. So people often have the misconception that athletes are one-dimensional. People think that they lack the range to speak on different important issues that face society today. But I think history shows that pro and college level athletes are often intimately connected to their communities and the challenges facing them. I think this is especially true of Morehouse men and Colgate students and Colgate graduates. So the first question I want to ask is actually about the political climate at Colgate that you've observed and also been a part of. And so during your time at Colgate so far, have you noticed any specific political issues that received a lot of interest or discussion amongst the student body?
yeah. So I think what's kind of unique at Colgate is that we kind of live in a bubble. And in terms of that, we're kind of isolated for things going on around us. Being in Hamilton, in kind of a small town, just being like 5,000 people and only mainly Colgate students, we're kind of distanced from political issues. Um, it's not necessarily events happening in like in Hamilton or in our town, but rather things kind of outside of our kind of community and going on in the US. That's not to say that we're not necessarily aware of the issues that are occurring all over the country. Um, and there's definitely panels and groups and communities that kind of bring these issues to focus. And I think for the most part, many students here are progressive and want positive change. But I don't think that this change is able to reach many audiences compared to if we were in a major city or had more students, maybe. Um, I can't really pick out a specific point where there was a big rally or
Mm,
something. But I think there's definitely a massive push for political change and to engage students with as a collective and to kind of bring together people for these issues. Like my dad went to college in San Francisco, and he's definitely told me about student-led rallies in, I guess, when was he in college, 1990s, kind of just bringing attention to this. And so I think Colgate students and myself kind of understand the importance of colleges coming together and having a voice in political discussion. But I feel like being in Colgate, it's kind of localized and it's not exactly widespread as we maybe would like it to be. So, but I definitely think that Colgate students are hyper aware of issues going on in our country and definitely want change, and the ways that we can do it on campus are definitely being done.
gotcha. Yeah, that's so interesting. I hadn't considered that like the effects that being sort of isolated in such a small town could have on the ability for the campus as a whole to engage in different political issues. And so, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it's like there's certainly different bubbles or groups of students that will be involved in different specific issues that they may have
Yeah.
a specific, like a particular interest in, but you're not going to see really like a whole campus movement around
Hmm.
one sort of like one specific thing. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause yeah, I feel like if that were to happen, if we had like a rally, I mean, I guess there is social media nowadays that can kind of get that message out. But like if we were to have a rally here, I feel like it would just be kind of for us,
Mm,
um, and not for maybe other people that kind of maybe Colgate students are all on the same page, but then we're also just preaching kind of to ourselves.
yeah. That's so interesting. I have that reminds me of a something that students at the school that I work at in Howard County, Maryland. Um, I think there was one of the bills passed in Florida, the one that was I think that wasn't technically called the Don't Say Gay bill, but it was around LGBT issues. And I think some of our students wanted to like organize, they wanted to organize like a walkout in protest of this.
Hmm.
And,
Yeah.
you know, I think there's certainly some value in doing something like that, like some cathartic value in that.
Hmm.
But in terms of it actually having an impact, it's like, listen, you're protesting something that doesn't directly affect you. And so, like, the idea that this is going to actually lead to some sort of tangible change is just not going to be there. And so, I think that's kind of what you're
Hmm.
saying, where it's like,
Yeah.
we could collectively protest against an issue that's affecting a specific community somewhere else. But, like, in reality, our protest is not going to directly affect that issue.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what
Hmm.
you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's no, I think that's an astute observation. Okay. All right. So now I want to talk specifically about a few issues being discussed and debated in our national political discourse. And I think we're going to start off with the broad issue of police brutality, police misconduct. So at this point, it's been a few years since George Floyd's murder at the hands of the Minneapolis police. During the protests following his death, there was much talk about police reform, with some calling for defunding the police. In the last few years, do you think enough has been done to fix the police brutality and corruption that poor people often endure in impoverished cities and communities?
Yeah. So for the whole defunding the police, I don't think I'm totally on board with that because at the end of the day, when you're in an emergency or something bad's happening, 911 is who you call. They're going to be the ones that are there. But I do think that there needs to be a different take on law enforcement and kind of funding community oriented policing. Um, I feel like there could be better work with communities at the local level to kind of educate and combat crime. Um, I think also with the local level that there's also can be more debate or discussion about kind of funding for um, policing and law enforcement and what kind of that entails. Um, More funding for certain cities could not be the solution and could lead to negative effects too. And but I think a main thing that must happen is that I think it's maybe not necessarily too easy to become a cop, but I think that there should be more steps to go through. And I don't necessarily mean more combat training or more like law testing, but more so kind of seeing where people are at in their lives and kind of what they want to get out of being a cop. I feel like the police brutality tax, it's not necessarily down to the station, but specific individuals that have um, certain beliefs and issues that they kind of use their own power to exploit these impoverished and marginalized people in the United States. And so I think more requirements, whether it's going through psychologists or something to see kind of where people are at and what they truly want to do being a cop, would help this matter.
Yeah, I think you made a few really good points there. So the first about you saying not really supporting defunding the police, that's something that I think you'd find most communities, even those that do deal with police forces where there are high levels of misconduct, most of those communities do not support defunding the police. So I think you'd be in line with them there. I think your point about certain departments actually needing more funding, and so the issue of like funding and policing really does depend on the community. I think there's definitely a great deal of truth to that. I think I've seen somewhere that one of the more brutal and corrupt police departments is actually in, I think it's like in New Mexico. They've got like a high
Oh.
instance of shooting unarmed people, but it's also like one of the poorest police departments in the country. And so like defunding a department that's already like seriously understaffed certainly isn't going to help the matter. And they actually probably need more money to deal with the issues that they're facing. And then your point about basically attempting to raise the standard of policing by increasing the requirements, giving different sorts of training to prospective officers to make sure that they're equipped to do the job and they're in the right mental state to do the job and really serve the people. I think that's really important as well. So yeah, I think three really good points that you made there. Steps that could be taken to deal with this issue.
Yeah.
All right. So let's moving on here to our next question. So fairly recently, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, allowing states to make their own abortion laws with no real oversight from the government. Some Republican majority states have already attempted to outlaw abortion completely. Some have succeeded, others have faced some pushback, and some ballot initiatives that they've attempted to pass have actually failed. But what are your thoughts on this? And is there anything you'd like to see elected officials do in response to the attempts in certain red states to limit access to abortion?
Yeah. So I remember distinctly when the decision happened. Me and my family and I were international on just a trip, and the decision came out, and me and my mom definitely had conversation about it, and she was very upset about it. She told me that she was born a couple years after the initial Roe v. Wade decision, and so just kind of being around in that time period and then seeing this overturned, she was very upset about it. And I don't personally feel that the government should have a place to say what a woman should or can't do with their body. I know that banning abortions would also lead to unsafe abortions, whether that's going to somewhere that's out of state and then could cause a bunch of issues, or going to someone that's not as trustworthy and then causing just even further issues for either the baby or the person or the family, whoever. So I'd like to see the government kind of bring back this issue and look at it again and kind of come to a different ruling. But yeah.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think I agree. I think that one thing that can't be lost in sort of the discussion of the Supreme Court's decision is that to your point, abortions are like always going to happen. And so really
Mhm.
the question isn't like, can you stop, is there a way to like stop them from happening? It's, are you comfortable with like them being safe abortions or unsafe abortions? And definitely one of the more problematic parts of this decision is that it's going to, increase the number of unsafe abortions and
Mhm.
just make it
Yeah.
make the situation much more dangerous for women. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, that's where the real issue lies. So yeah,
Mhm.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on to our next question here about the increase in gun violence in America. So since the pandemic, there's been a significant uptick in homicides and gun-related homicides in this country. The homicide rate has increased exponentially in certain cities, and our country has also dealt with several high-profile mass shootings in public spaces. What do you think should be done to deal with this issue?
I definitely think that there has to be more um to more prevention done for gun related crimes and mass shootings. I think that it's kind of a horrible thing that mass shootings and crime or gun related crime has been kind of a norm, um, or has become a norm in this country. I think the people's access to guns is a little too easy. I think the system of background checks for guns purchase is not working necessarily. Um, it's also interesting that a lot of these people that are committing these mass shootings, they don't really have a background, um, and have no prior history. So I think there has to be more precautions done, for those seeking a gun. Kind of going back to the police question, I think people buying guns should kind of also have to go through maybe a doctor or psychologist to kind of ensure the mentality of the person is kind of correct and aligns with not seeking any violence. Um, and I also think that our gun laws directly correlate with violence, elsewhere, especially in Mexico. I think I learned about in one of my classes how, just our lax gun laws allows people to get guns here and then cross them, or smuggle them in to Mexico, and that leads to Mexico's violence has increased and their homicide rates have increased. So I think our faulty gun regulations have caused mass shootings here. Oops, sorry.
You good?
Homicides, to increase here, but I also think that it has to be put under the spotlight and looked at to be improved because it's negatively affecting, children in our country, families in our country, but it's also affecting the same thing in other countries that is in many ways our fault.
Yeah, yeah, that's I mean, you make a lot of very good points there. So the first one about kind of needing more sort of common sense gun regulations. I think there's a pretty significant body of evidence to suggest that a few gun regulations that most Americans currently support would go a long way to preventing um, especially like the mass shootings. I think Australia in like the last couple of decades underwent like a series of these gun regulations, and they had a pretty significant effect there. But the second point you made is one that is really not talked about enough. There's a phenomenal book called Blood, Gun, Money about the sort of the illegal how the gun trade like flows from America into Mexico. Um,
Mhm.
and it's quite alarming. I mean, some of these cities in Mexico have these extremely high homicide rates, and
Mhm.
their gun regulations are like really, really strict. There's like very few gun shops,
Yeah,
even to like there may be like only one gun shop or something in the entire country, something wild like that.
yeah,
And so all of these guns are being trafficked into their country, making it extremely dangerous. Like these cartels have immense power, and all the firearms are from America. And then it's interesting that because this actually will lead into the next question I'll ask about immigration. And so you have, so many people from different parts of Central America, inclusive of Mexico, come to America seeking refuge from violent gangs that are being armed with the guns that we produce in
yeah,
America.
exactly.
And so it's a much deeper issue
Hmm.
than many people understand. And so I think it was great that you brought that point. It's very important.
Yeah,
Um, so speaking of immigration, so this is definitely a topic that's always at the forefront of political discussion during election time. And it's even gotten to the point where when we're not around an election, it's still talked about endlessly. Um,
hmm,
my wife's actually an immigration lawyer, so I talk about immigration policy quite a bit with her.
yeah,
Um, but there are hundreds of thousands of immigrants seeking refuge in America from parts of the world where they face gang violence, war, and oppressive government regimes. Um, I think typically what's talked about is immigrants seeking refuge from Central America. Um, so, what do you think our country's response should be to these people who want to come to this country?
yeah. I think immigration as a whole is kind of close to me. I mean, my mom being second generation Chinese, and so recently my family has moved here, or in the past couple generations, and on my dad's side, something similar, not too long ago, and I feel like that's similar for everyone in the United States. We not except Native Americans. I don't think there's anyone that is truly from here. We all immigrated at one time or at some point. Um, and it's kind of what made this country what it is, just being a mixing pot, bringing cultures together. Um, and that's just kind of been at the backbone of our country. And immigrants play a massive role in kind of, especially being from California, there's a lot of farmland, and kind of seeing immigrants being there from farming to small businesses to like the service industry. They're like pretty much vital to our economy. And um, the US has had in the past policies to accept refugees and immigrants fleeing these countries, where violence and oppression is way too prominent. And that's similar to what our founding fathers did, was they were escaping tyranny from the English rule. So I feel like this country has been kind of that place for refugees to come. But I definitely think it is a complicated subject. My mom working in affordable housing and living in California, there is a lot of homelessness. And my mom has definitely talked about the housing crisis that we have in the United States. So I think there are questions about how can we home these refugees, when we can't even house the people that are already here.
Mm,
Um, so I think that's something that needs to be talked about, but I do think that it is inherently the nature of the United States to accept those looking for the freedoms of the United States, and also an escape from inhumane conditions in many ways.
yeah, no, I think yeah, I agree. I think there's two things you said that are really important. The first, sort of the moral argument for immigration, speaking to sort of the history of the United States, how basically there are three different groups of people that inhabit this country. To your point, many of which are immigrants. You've got descendants of slaves, and then you've got Native Americans. And so, that being our history, to then sort of turn our backs on people now who want the same things that many of our ancestors wanted and were able to have, seems a bit inconsistent.
Yeah.
The point you made about the economy is really quite important, and it really highlights the farce of like deportation and immigrant detention, which is that if it were possible to deport every undocumented immigrant in the country right now, several major industries in the country would immediately collapse on themselves.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
and so like the idea that even when those specifically on the political right talk about a desire to like round up and deport people, this is not something anyone seriously actually wants, because the country couldn't function.
Yeah, exactly.
um and then the last point that you make about housing is an important one. We definitely have a housing crisis, and an affordable housing crisis. And I think one of the things that some of the pro-immigration scholars that I like to read, like one specific guy, Alex Nauerster from the Cato Institute, he's talked about this. When immigration is made, when legal paths to immigration are made easier, we find that people who try to come here, oftentimes they have like family that's already here, right? And if they're able to easily get to where those family members are, you'd have less vagrancy, at least amongst like the immigrant population. But what we have instead is like the farce that's going on in Florida, where you've got people being bused to places where like they don't know anybody, or in Texas, the same sort of things happening.
Yeah.
And so it like exacerbates the problem of affordable housing, when it's like an easier solution is there for us, if only those in power had any interest in actually pursuing that. So yeah, to your point, very complicated issue, but I think each of the points you made are well made. All right, so last question here. I want to ask about the prospect of college athletes unionizing. So I think at this point, this is 1 or 2 years old, but there's a College Football Players Association that was founded in an attempt to secure long-term medical care, a percentage of media revenue, and a host of other benefits for players. Do you think, as a Division I college athlete yourself, it's a good idea for college athletes to try and unionize?
Yeah. Um, I don't know if I know too much about the topic. Like thinking about it, on one hand, you think it would be beneficial for one organization or union to represent student athletes, with one voice and for one goal that would be for everyone on equal footing. But I guess I just don't know enough on the subject, in terms of how the union would get paid or funded. And does that mean those on athletic scholarships, would be those amounts would be reduced to pay for
Mm.
this service? Um, and then if people are getting different amounts of aid, how do we ensure equality for everyone? So I guess in theory, I think unionizing could lend many advantages to student athletes, if done in the correct and appropriate manner. But I guess I just don't know entirely about the subject and kind of how to go about that.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair response, and I think what you've highlighted is some of the logistical challenges to trying to form, especially like one union that would represent all college athletes. Like there's something to
Mhm.
be said about, would it be more effective to have unions for different sports or unions in different conferences to meet the needs of like different athletes at different levels.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a lot of moving parts that would need to be worked out before
Hmm.
an idea like this is ultimately realized. Um,
Yeah.
but
And I guess I just don't know. Like, if why do we need a union if we have the NCAA, and if are they supposed to be the ones representing the student athletes? And like, isn't that where NIL was kind of created? So yeah, I just kind of have a lot of questions that I don't know a ton
mm,
about. So
yeah, yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. It was I will say I think the NIL, like I know the NIL seemed to be sort of in response to like the Supreme Court case
oh
where yeah, so there's a recently there was a Supreme Court case where I mean surprisingly the really the conservatives on the court uh in unison with the liberals were basically saying that the NCAA has like a revenue model that is founded on not paying the athletes. And they were like, you can't have
mhm.
a revenue model that's based on like keeping these people, like making it illegal for them to even make money on
Yeah,
their own. And
yeah,
so, yeah, the NIL was a bit in response to that. But you make a very good point, which is that the NCAA is supposed to be looking out for the best interest of the athletes. But perhaps
mhm,
the prospect of a union is in response to the idea that they aren't they're more so looking out for themselves and
mhm.
their different revenue streams.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's interesting stuff. But shoot, it's all right, man. I think that's all the time we'll have for today. I uh
Okay.
I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. Uh
Hmm.
the enjoyable conversation. And yeah, man, I hope you have a great remainder of the school year and good luck with the rest of your college athletic career.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's my pleasure, brother. It's my pleasure. I really did enjoy this.
Yep, me too.